Hi.
The mornings in their house were always quiet in a particular kind of way. The kind that didn't soothe you, but settled on your chest like dust no one cared to wipe. The kettle clicked off by itself. I stood in the kitchen of the big house, drying glasses that didn't look like anyone ever drank from them. The marble countertops were cold against my skin, even through the fabric of my blouse. Everything was immaculate, and still it felt like something was watching, measuring, waiting. He wasn't supposed to be there. I was told Fridays were safe. He'd be out at work or golf, somewhere important, somewhere where men like him belonged. But I turned from the pantry, glass in hand, and there he was in the doorway. No greeting, no smile, just eyes, heavy, still. His gaze dragged across me slowly, and I felt my breath catch, not from fear, from surprise at how long it had been since someone actually looked. Really looked. I adjusted the hem of my skirt. It wasn't short, not really, just tighter around the hips than it used to be. My husband never noticed clothes anymore, or changes in hair, or how I stopped wearing perfume. I watched him last week fall asleep mid-sentence during dinner. I could have walked out naked, and he probably would have asked me to turn down the thermostat. That kind of marriage. Comfortable, predictable, quiet in a way that gnaws at your insides like mice behind the walls. Sorry, I said. Didn't know you were home. He said nothing. Just walked past me, close enough that his sleeve brushed mine. I didn't move, didn't flinch. My pulse did that for me. That night, I served soup while my husband scrolled his phone. He grunted when I told him I'd worked an extra hour. Not angry, just uninterested. I watched his fork scrape the bowl. We used to talk. At least I think we did. Later, I opened my phone before bed, just to check messages, just routine. You left a hairpin near the bookshelves. The message read, no name, no punctuation, just that. And one cold, gray emoji at the end. A small, closed envelope. I hadn't realized I dropped anything, but apparently I had. The days dragged on, stretching into one another, but every time I stepped into that house, everything felt different. He was there, always there, watching me with eyes that didn't miss a thing. At first, I tried to ignore it, to carry on with the mundane tasks, cleaning, straightening things that didn't need to be straightened, all the while feeling like there was a whisper in the back of my mind, something I couldn't put into words. But it was there, always there. I had gone into the laundry room to fold some clothes. The steady hum of the dryer, the smell of fresh linens was supposed to be calming, but instead, it felt like a trap. And then the door opened behind me. His footsteps were soft against the floor, but I could feel him there, like his presence filled the space between the walls. Need help with that? His voice was low, a casual offer. But the way he said it, like it was more than just help, made my chest tighten. I turned, trying to smile, trying to keep everything normal. No, it's all right. Just finishing up. He leaned against the doorframe, watching me, his arms crossed. The silence stretched between us, and I felt the weight of it pressing down on me. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just watched. There was a flicker of something in his eyes. It wasn't sexual, not at first. It was curiosity. Something I hadn't seen in a long time. He wasn't waiting for me to speak. He was waiting for me to feel something, to give something. I could feel my skin tightening under his gaze, my heart picking up pace. It wasn't just his proximity that affected me. It was the way he looked at me, like I was more than just the housekeeper, more than just a part of his daily routine. The dryer stopped, the sudden silence ringing in my ears. I turned to pull the clothes out, but before I could, he was closer. So close I could feel the heat radiating off his body. His hand brushed mine, light as a feather, but it felt like it had burned straight through me. Sorry, he murmured, though I wasn't sure if he was apologizing for the touch or for something else. Something unsaid. I didn't move. I didn't pull away. His fingers lingered for a second too long, and I felt an odd tug in my chest. Something I hadn't felt in years. Something familiar but buried deep. I didn't know how to respond. My whole body was tense, my heart hammering in my chest, but I stayed still. My thoughts were muddled, emotions clashing with every passing second. And then he was gone, as if nothing had happened, as if everything was fine. I stood there for a long time, the laundry forgotten in my hands. The suddenness of it all left me shaken, but I couldn't make sense of what had just transpired. My body still thrummed with awareness. I shouldn't have noticed, shouldn't have felt anything. But I did. I couldn't help it. When I returned to the kitchen, my husband was sitting at the table, a cold beer in his hand, eyes glued to his phone. It was the same routine, but something inside me shifted. It wasn't anger. It wasn't frustration. It was emptiness. I had become so used to his indifference, so numb to his presence that I didn't even know who I was anymore. The night passed in silence, as it always did. But I lay awake, thinking of the brief touch, of the way he had looked at me. And though I should have felt guilty, I didn't. I felt alive. The realization hit me like a wave. I wanted more than this. I needed more than this. I lay there in the dark, listening to the muffled sounds of my husband's steady breathing beside me, but my mind was somewhere else. Somewhere far away from this house. Far away from the quiet, from the indifference. And for the first time in years, I felt a spark of something. It wasn't just about the touch. It wasn't just about the feeling. It was about the longing. The desire for something I hadn't known I was missing until it was dangled in front of me. I turned on my side, my back to him, and closed my eyes. But sleep wouldn't come. I couldn't stop thinking about him. The message came late Thursday night, short and unexpected. Are you free tomorrow? No name, no pleasantries, just that. I stared at the screen for a long time, thumb hovering over the keyboard. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. By Friday morning, I was already dressed and walking to the bus stop with that quiet yes pulsing in the base of my throat like a second heartbeat. He was waiting in the car, engine running, parked just far enough from the usual corner where no one would think to look. It wasn't dramatic or romantic. It was clinical, intentional. His window lowered as I approached, and he barely looked up from the steering wheel. Get in if you're coming. I did. Of course I did. We didn't speak much during the ride. The air between us wasn't filled with tension, not exactly. It was something heavier, a strange stillness that made every passing street blur like an afterthought. I noticed how his hand gripped the wheel, relaxed, in control, while my own fingers fidgeted with the hem of my sleeve, betraying every ounce of calm I tried to fake. He played a jazz record through the speakers, the kind with too much brass and not enough melody. It made the silence even louder. I need to stop by a place just outside town, he said eventually. Not long. I nodded. That's all. No questions, no hesitation. We took the long road west, where the houses thinned and the city slipped into fields and half-built shopping centers. He parked outside a low, pale brick building that looked like an old inn or a retreat center. Something anonymous, quiet, private. Inside, the lobby smelled like lemonwood polish and stale potpourri. The lights were dim. There was no front desk in sight. He walked ahead, and I followed. Not because he asked, but because I couldn't imagine doing anything else. We entered a room on the second floor. Neutral colors, one large window, a table with papers, a kettle, two mismatched chairs. I stood by the door, unsure what I was meant to do. You clean, right? He said with a dry half-smile, setting down his briefcase. Thought I could use a professional opinion on the space. It was a joke, maybe not. I didn't laugh. I didn't speak. I just walked slowly toward the window, resting my hands on the ledge. It was quiet for a long time. Then I felt his presence behind me. He hadn't moved loudly, but the air shifted. Warmer, closer. His voice was low. You keep showing up like this, making it hard to be decent. I didn't turn around. I didn't say anything. My body stayed still, but everything inside me spun like I was losing my balance. His fingers brushed the side of my arm, just below the sleeve, slow and deliberate. When I finally turned, it wasn't sudden. It was slow, like surrender. We stood there for a moment. No distance. No pretense. His eyes searched mine, and I wasn't sure what he was looking for. Permission, guilt, something more complicated. Whatever it was, I gave it to him without a word. He leaned in. The kiss was soft at first. Intentional. Measured. Like we both knew the cost of what we were doing and did it anyway. There was no rush. No fire. Just heat. Slow, blooming heat that spread from my chest out to my fingertips, wrapping around my spine like it had always belonged there. When he pulled back, I kept my eyes closed a moment longer, as if I could hold on to the feeling just a second more before reality crept back in. But it always does, doesn't it? He walked to the table, picked up a file, said nothing. I adjusted my sleeves again, smoothed the wrinkles in my skirt, and stared out the window as if the sky could give me an answer. We didn't speak on the drive back. Not a word. The jazz was gone. Just the sound of tires on asphalt and two people pretending this meant nothing, when it was the only thing that had meant something in a very long time. By the time I stepped out of the car, I could still feel his breath on my neck. And I hated how much I wanted to feel it again. The laundry basket slipped from my hands when I opened the dryer door and saw the lace folded between the towels. Ivory, delicate, something I hadn't worn at home. Not once. I stared at it for several seconds too long, not because I didn't know what it was, but because I couldn't decide what to do next. It was the set I'd worn that Friday, the day he kissed me with the kind of certainty my husband hadn't shown in years. I'd washed it without thinking, automatically, and now it sat there, silent evidence. I didn't notice him behind me until I heard the familiar cough. I turned quickly, forcing a neutral face. He was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, face unreadable. "You buy new stuff?" he asked. His voice didn't rise. It never did. That was the trick with him. Everything always sounded casual, even when it wasn't. I shrugged. It was on sale. He didn't push further, just nodded, turned, walked away. But something shifted after that. He didn't wait for dinner that night. Didn't ask where I'd been. I made chicken. He left the plate untouched. I washed dishes in silence, staring at the water until my hands wrinkled. He started sleeping with his back permanently turned, a new line drawn down the middle of the bed neither of us acknowledged. I didn't try to cross it. Not because I was afraid, because I didn't want to. I'd catch myself dressing slower in the mornings, choosing underwear like it mattered again, like someone might see it and think of me differently. And I hated myself for that. Or maybe I didn't. I wasn't sure. The next time I went to the big house, I noticed something different the moment I walked in. A woman's voice echoing faintly from upstairs. At first, I thought maybe the television was on, but then I saw the purse on the entryway bench. Designer. Red leather. Not the kind you leave behind unless you belong there. I moved more quietly that day. I stayed on the first floor, dusting in near silence, though my thoughts were loud and unwelcome. I caught a glimpse of her coming down the staircase, talking into her phone, laughing. A clean, well-kept woman, perfectly pressed. The kind of woman who didn't wait for glances or measure silences. She just existed in rooms like she owned them. He didn't come downstairs. Not once. I finished my tasks quickly, hands shaking as I sprayed the counter. There was no note that day. No envelope. No music playing. Just the ticking of an expensive clock and the soft sound of her heels in the hallway above. It shouldn't have mattered. But it did. That night, I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in months. The one where I kept old cards, small folded notes, Receipts from years ago when we still left messages for each other in jacket pockets. I found a picture of us at a wedding, arms around each other, eyes squinting in the sun. I stared at my own face, the smile stretched wide and full of hope. I didn't recognize her. He texted me just after 10. "You looked beautiful today, even in gloves." I didn't answer. I just read it over and over, like it would change something. But it didn't. It was the room I used to clean last, the office at the end of the upstairs hallway. He wasn't usually home when I dusted it, and if he was, he stayed away. But that day, the door was already open, and he was standing by the window, his back to me, a glass in his hand. The sun hit the side of his face just enough to make him look older, tired even. He didn't turn when I walked in. "I didn't think you'd come," he said quietly. I didn't answer. I placed the cleaning cloth on the desk, careful not to meet his gaze. There was a kind of electricity in the air I couldn't name. Not heat, not tension, just something vibrating low beneath the surface. I pretended to dust the bookshelf, though my fingers barely touched anything. When I turned, he was closer. Not threatening, not even intentionally intimate, just present in a way most men aren't. Like his stillness was an act of attention. I felt it in my neck, in my wrists, in the small of my back. He said, "We shouldn't," but didn't step away. My breath caught. My skin felt too tight for my body. We kissed, but it wasn't like the first time. It wasn't testing, curious, hesitant. It was knowing. And that's what made it worse. He kissed me like he knew exactly what I needed. Not to be conquered, not to be worshipped, but to be noticed, to be consumed and remembered. I leaned into it like someone who had waited too long to speak. We didn't say anything after. He returned to the window as if we had only exchanged a glance. I wiped my lips slowly, tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear, and finished dusting the side table just to have something to do. Later that evening, my husband came home early. He didn't knock, didn't call ahead, just opened the front door and walked in like nothing had changed. "I'll be out of town a few days," he said from the hallway. "Work." He didn't ask where I'd been, didn't ask why I didn't greet him. His duffel bag sat untouched by the coat rack. He didn't pack it. Didn't need to. It wasn't a real trip. Just an excuse to vanish without accountability. He left without saying goodbye. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, one hand resting on the cold counter, the other still clutching the cloth from earlier. I hadn't eaten all day. I didn't feel hungry. That night, I lay awake on my side of the bed. I thought of the window in his office, the view, the stillness, the way his hand had rested on the small of my back for just a moment longer than necessary. I tried to recall the way my husband used to touch me, but nothing came. Not one specific memory, just static. At 1:12 a.m., my phone lit up on the nightstand. A new message. "Don't come anymore. We're working things out. Take care of yourself." No greeting, no explanation, not even a name. But I knew. I turned the screen over and let it go dark. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just lay there, eyes wide, the ceiling above me unfamiliar in its silence. Something inside me collapsed with the weight of the obvious. I wasn't part of anyone's life. I had only drifted through it, a shadow, a substitute, a momentary answer to someone else's boredom. And I let it happen. I participated in my own erasure with open arms. The house was silent again, the kind of silence that wraps around your throat and slowly tightens. I stayed in bed later than usual that morning. The alarm went off, but I let it ring until it stopped itself, fading into the walls like every other sound in this house eventually does. Outside, the light was soft and gray, the kind of light that made everything look older than it was. The curtains, the dresser, my reflection. When I finally dragged myself into the bathroom, I caught sight of myself in the mirror and stood there longer than I should have. My hair was tangled, the skin under my eyes puffy, but it wasn't the exhaustion that startled me. It was the absence of anything. No anger, no sadness. Just a flat, dull space behind my eyes, as if someone had pulled the plug on whatever was left of me and let it all drain out in silence. I opened the drawer where I kept the ivory set. The one he once said made me look impossible to ignore. I held it in my hands for a few seconds, then folded it carefully and placed it in a plastic bag. Not to throw away, not to save, just to remove from sight. The house creaked with morning sounds. The settling of wood, the hum of the refrigerator, a wind gust outside brushing against the siding. But no footsteps. My husband had returned sometime after midnight and gone straight to the couch. I didn't ask where he'd been. He didn't ask about the bags of laundry still unpacked in the hallway. We had slipped into that familiar rhythm where absence became less painful than presence. Later, I wandered the house, not out of duty, but out of habit. I watered the 2 plants near the front window, both half dead from neglect. I threw away a flyer from the church around the corner. I moved a stack of unread magazines from one place to another. Everything was a slow choreography of distraction. I made coffee, drank it standing at the sink, stared at the neighbor's mailbox and imagined what their kitchen smelled like in the morning. Probably eggs, probably toast, probably something with butter and talking and not so much space between sentences. Around noon, I found myself in front of the hall closet, pulling down a box I hadn't touched in years. It was heavier than I remembered. Inside were photos, cards, old receipts, and one letter I'd written years ago but never gave to him. The writing was messier than I remembered. In it, I'd written about how I missed us. How I missed the way he used to touch the small of my back when he passed behind me. How I missed feeling like a woman, not a task. I folded the letter back into the envelope and returned everything to the box. The rest of the day passed in slow, forgettable movements. I ignored 2 calls from a friend who always said the wrong things at the worst times. I ate half a sandwich. I swept the floor twice. By evening, he was back, showered, dressed in his usual worn t-shirt, eyes blank. "Dinner?" he asked, not looking up from the remote. "Not hungry," I said. He didn't respond, just turned on the news, volume low. We were sharing space, but not a life. Breathing the same air, but speaking in borrowed phrases that meant nothing. That night, I lay awake with my body turned toward the wall and his weight a distant warmth behind me. I could hear the faint rhythm of his breathing, steady and indifferent. I thought about how quickly things can stop meaning something. How the same hands that once made you feel like fire could turn into hands you barely remembered the texture of. And still, I wanted someone to touch me. Not out of obligation, not out of routine, but with purpose, with hunger, with eyes that said they still saw something worth reaching for. But the only thing reaching for me was the dark. It had been a week since he last messaged me. 7 days of silence that felt louder than anything he'd ever said. I told myself I was fine. I kept my head down, followed the routines. I made the bed. I washed the dishes before he could notice the pile. I even folded his shirts the way he liked. Sleeves tucked in, collar up, middle creased. But I didn't feel present. I wasn't really there. Just a shell moving through each motion like a scene from someone else's life. Saturday morning, I went to the market. I walked through the aisles slowly, running my fingers over the apples, the cucumbers, the cold glass of the dairy fridge. I picked things I didn't need. Maybe just to hold something. Maybe just to pass time. The air smelled like oranges and dust. The cashier smiled too long when I didn't respond to her greeting. On the way out, I saw them. He was standing near the bakery display, his hand resting lightly on the back of a woman's coat. She was laughing at something he said. It was her again. The wife, the one with the perfect purse and the practiced smile. He looked good, relaxed. The lines in his face had softened. His eyes didn't search the room the way they used to when I was in it. He saw me, only for a second. Our eyes met. No surprise, no panic. Just a brief acknowledgement, like I was someone he'd passed in a hallway once. A nod, a ghost of a smile, and then nothing. He turned back to her, pointed at the croissants. She laughed again. I stood frozen, fingers tightening around the plastic bag until the handles bit into my skin. I left without buying anything. That night, I didn't make dinner. I let the kitchen stay dark. My husband came home smelling like sweat and sawdust. He dropped his bag by the door and kicked off his boots. He didn't ask about the groceries. Didn't ask if I was okay. I think he knew the rules by now. No questions. No answers. "I'll be gone again next weekend," he said flatly. I nodded. That was all. I sat on the edge of the bathtub for a long time after he fell asleep on the couch. The mirror above the sink was streaked, and I didn't bother wiping it. I stared at my own reflection, blurred and uneven, trying to find a version of myself I could still recognize. Not the one who had waited for messages. Not the one who'd leaned into a kiss like it could save her. Just something solid. Something real. I opened my phone, scrolled through old photos. Not of him. Of me. Ones I hadn't deleted yet. One where I'm sitting on a bench in spring, coffee in hand, hair tied up, laughing at something off camera. I looked full. Awake. I missed that version of myself more than I missed either of them. I thought about quitting all my jobs. About starting over. Maybe moving away. But I didn't want a new city. I wanted a new mind. One that didn't replay his hands on my waist or his mouth against my collarbone. One that didn't crave the feeling of being wanted, even temporarily. That night, as I lay in bed alone, I opened the voice recorder on my phone. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just pressed record. "I can still feel you," I whispered, staring at the ceiling. "But I don't want to remember." I saved the file, left the title blank. And for once, I slept without dreaming. The next morning felt unfamiliar. The house had the same furniture, the same chipped edges on the hallway baseboards, the same cracked tile by the sink. But something had shifted. I moved through the rooms as if I were a guest in a life that didn't belong to me anymore. I made coffee and forgot to drink it. I looked at the laundry basket and decided not to touch it. There was no reason to fold things no one noticed unfolded. He was home that Sunday. The whole day. It had been months since we'd spent more than an hour under the same roof. We didn't argue, didn't speak beyond necessity, just passed each other with tight smiles and avoidant glances. I offered to cook. He said he wasn't hungry. I said I wasn't either. We both lied. At some point in the late afternoon, I caught myself watching him from the hallway. He was sitting on the edge of the couch, elbows on his knees, scrolling through his phone with the dull patience of someone waiting for time to pass. His face looked older than I remembered. Tired. The lines that used to form around his mouth when he laughed had deepened but now existed without the laughter. We used to touch each other constantly. Not just sexually, small things. Fingers brushing in the kitchen. A hand on the back while passing through a door. My cheek on his shoulder during late-night movies. All of it had evaporated quietly, without a single fight. We had starved to death slowly, politely. That night, he took the bedroom. No questions, no explanation. I didn't contest it. I took the couch. The springs dug into my ribs. The blanket smelled like the attic. I stared at the ceiling and thought of nothing. Not him. Not the other him. Just nothing. Sometime after midnight, I got up to use the bathroom. On the way back, I saw the faint light spilling from the crack in the bedroom door. I stood outside it for longer than I cared to admit. Not because I wanted to enter, but because I wanted to remember what it felt like to want to. I turned away, went to the kitchen, opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a better occasion, though none had come. I didn't pour a glass. I drank straight from the bottle. The wine was dry and sharp, but it made my mouth feel real again, like it belonged to me. The next day, I opened the closet and pulled out every old shirt, jacket, and dress that didn't feel like mine anymore. I put them in black bags without ceremony. I didn't cry. I didn't even pause to reminisce. I wasn't erasing memories. I was removing costumes, outfits I'd worn to keep peace, to appear pleasant, to seem small enough not to be a burden. A friend called. I didn't answer. She left a message asking if I wanted to get coffee. I deleted it before it finished. Around noon, I swept the living room just to have something to do. The broom moved in slow arcs, gathering dust that had settled like old disappointment. Later that night, I stepped out onto the back porch. The air was cold and I was barefoot, but I didn't care. The stars were dull through the city haze, but even their dimness felt more honest than anything inside that house. I sat down on the steps, wrapped my arms around my knees, and let the silence hold me. I wasn't angry. I wasn't heartbroken. I wasn't even confused. I was empty in the cleanest way, like the aftermath of a storm, like the part of the ocean where the waves no longer reach the shore. I didn't hear the door close when he left. I just noticed the absence, the stillness of the living room, the coat missing from the hook, the keys placed neatly on the windowsill like a full stop at the end of a sentence. He hadn't packed anything. Not the drawer of socks he always said were impossible to match. Not the old mug he drank from every morning. Not even the shaving kit I'd once gifted him back when things still felt worth the effort. There was no letter, no confrontation, no final words meant to explain or accuse. Just the quiet, deliberate vacancy of someone who no longer saw any point in staying. I walked through the house slowly, as if retracing someone else's memories. The hallway smelled like wood polish and dust. The bed was made, his side untouched. A part of me expected to feel relief, a rush of sudden freedom, the opening of a door long locked, but it wasn't like that. It was just quiet. I brewed coffee and sat at the table, staring at the mug I'd used for years. The same chipped rim, the faint stain inside that never quite scrubbed away. I drank slowly, feeling the heat in my chest but not in my hands. There was no urgency now. No roles to perform. No one to notice if I sat in silence for the next hour or the next decade. I thought of the man in the other house, his hand on my spine, his mouth on mine, his voice low and certain when he said we shouldn't. I remembered every moment of it, not because it was sacred, but because it had been the first time in years I'd felt like someone worth noticing. And maybe that was the real wound, not the ending, not the rejection, but the brief glimpse of something I'd almost believed was possible. I didn't hate him. That would have been too easy. I didn't even miss him. What I missed was the version of myself I thought I was when I stood in front of him. Strong, wanted, new. But even that had been temporary, a fiction written in glances and half-promises. I opened the windows to let the air in. The breeze moved through the curtains like a whisper, lifting them gently before letting them fall again. I made the bed fresh, this time across the whole surface. Not just my side, not just his. I found a new tablecloth in the back of the pantry, one I'd bought on sale and never used because it was too bright, too loud. I spread it across the table like a quiet act of defiance. Cooked myself a proper meal, not to impress, not to please, just to eat. Just to feel the rhythm of living return, even if clumsily. When the sun began to set, I lit a candle, even though no one else was there to see it. I stood by the window, arms crossed, and watched the neighborhood darken one house at a time. My phone buzzed once. A name I no longer saved. I didn't answer. I turned the phone face down and left it on the counter. That night, I slept in the center of the bed. The silence wasn't as sharp anymore. It felt like fabric, something soft, something that wrapped around me instead of pressing down. And before I closed my eyes, I whispered something into the room. Not for him, not for the past, but for the version of myself I had lost and finally begun to reclaim. They both left. And I stayed.
Bye.